devices operating in Portugal, Spain, and France. The topics addressed were areas, key priority research areas identified in the State of the Science 2020 report, namely underwater noise, seafloor integrity, electromagnetic fields, fish population, and marine dynamics. This is an overview of the activities that we have conducted at the different test sites so far. With regards to acoustics or underwater noise, we were able to conduct successful campaigns using 3 idle phones placed at increasing distances from WECs. We acquired data during different seasons, and we modeled 3 different frequencies. With this, we were able to compute acoustic disturbance area metrics. You can see here in this figure an example for the sound pressure level modeling at the EMIR test site in France. And you can see that propagation is different for the different frequencies, and that higher levels of SPL are seen in the vicinity of the WEC, and they decrease with increasing distance from the WEC. So this blue contour here, in the center, is essentially the area where the SPL of the WEC surpasses background noise, which in this case was about, in average, 1 to 3 kilometers. So this is the area where low frequency stations will be affected purely by noise coming from the WEC. Then, in black, this outer area, is the area where background noise is higher than auditive thresholds given for low frequency stations. So overall, this means that the area where low frequency stations are expected to be influenced by noise coming from the WEC operation is much smaller compared to the area where background noise can reach. Something to take into consideration is that these areas depend on the season and also on the wave height. For the electromagnetic fields, we were able to improve the previous system using WELI project, which was basically a PASM system towed by a vessel. In this case, we used an AUV, towing the similar system. This UV allowed to cover large areas and acquire data at constant height above the seafloor. Here you have a diagram of the export cable at the same test site and the transects that we conducted. Some data was discarded due to some issues with the AUV, but overall the data collected allowed us to validate the tool previously developed in the WELI project. Also, we use this tool to simulate different scenarios, for example, having the cables or the devices operating at their rated conditions. In this table you have some of the results for the 3 different test sites, and you have the magnetic and electric fields estimated for different distances from the cables. Overall, results suggest that the values are quite below those values reported in the literature as having some kind of behavioral or physiological effect on fish or crustaceans. With regards to the seafloor integrity, we were able to monitor the seafloor morphology. We did this by using a side scan sonar coupled to the AUV and covering a large area, and then using an ROV to add some detail on specific areas. So the imagery retrieved by the ROV shows plenty of fish being attracted or even using these artificial structures as a refuge. In this case, these are mooring chains and an anchor. And then the side scan sonar provides us with some detail on the footprint, because in this case this is the PNAP test site and it's mooring chain being lifted by rising tide. So this area here was computed as below 1% of the total installation area, and therefore the impact was considered non-significant. The fish communities were monitored using the ARSTI's aquatic service vehicle, Itadron. The Itadron was able to work remotely and autonomously and covered large areas. Instead of the WaveGem device, which was not at the site at the moment, the ArchLab device was monitored, similar impacts were expected because this is also a floating device and has a similar area compared to the WaveGem. So here you can see some of the results. Basically, you have fish relative abundance below the ArchLab and far away from it. Overall, the results suggest that there are no significant differences in the fish abundances, and so therefore no effects were expected by this device. Regarding marine dynamics, the methods used previously in WESI were validated, namely for the BMAPS test site, which had been monitored previously, so models are now stable and robust, and this type of statistical downscaling, which was evaluated and was considered suitable for this type of studies. Basically, the downscaling translates information from oceanic to coastal conditions, and this allows to reduce computation. And this here is an example for the Ecosudor test site where we have an array of, I believe, 80 devices. And you can see there is some shadowing effect which decreases towards shore. But overall, this WEC farm would not have an influence on sediment transport or similar processes towards shore. Finally, data is being shared through the Marinata portal, which was also previously developed and being improved in SafeWave. This platform includes data from other projects, namely WESE, SeaWave, Sophia, and now SafeWave. Its data is searchable in FrameRay. And well, essentially you can go to the portal, register, and then you can either select a site and retrieve data from that site, or you can select a parameter and retrieve data across test sites. So what about the challenges? Well, of course, there are general challenges, and most of them are related with the lack of large-scale demonstration projects. So there is a lack of monitoring data, which is not only useful to develop, improve, or validate models, but also to compare with present results, and which allow interpret results. And of course, sometimes this data is private and is not accessible. It's also complicated to develop a monitoring plan which is standardized and can be directly applicable to the different technologies in the different test sites. These monitoring plans many times need to be aligned either with regulations or with the industrial schedules. And then, as I mentioned, having data publicly available and kept publicly available is also complicated. Specific challenges occurred for the different types of monitoring. For example, the acoustic monitoring can only be done when the devices can only be installed when the CALMSI states exist. We need always a large temporal data resolution, namely collecting data at least for 1 year in different seasons. Also, there is sometimes lack of auxiliary information, such as the WEX operational data, or sometimes data just don't have resolution enough. Finally, there is a lack of dedicated standards, and these are mostly linked with the general challenge number 1. For the electromagnetic field, data acquisition requires that CALMSI states exist, and this in turn makes data measurements low because the device will be producing very low power, which in turn will result in low magnetic fields. Also, as I mentioned during this presentation, it's complicated to understand the natural burial throughout the whole cable, and also to understand effects on animals in the natural environment. So there are plenty of studies in the laboratory, but of course conditions in the nature are very different, and well, different inputs can be expected in the natural environment. With regards to the seafloor integrity, acquiring data under strong hydrodynamic conditions is complicated. For example, operating the ROV in very fast currents is very complicated. Estimating the affected footprint, it's also hard because in these conditions many times the footprint is gone in a couple of days. Also to estimate effects on the venting communities. The methodology used, so imagery methodology, allows only for a 2D sampling Of course, if we want more detail on the communities, we need to acquire data in some other way. This was a challenge for the fish communities monitoring, which was overcome. So basically, to have some kind of equipment that can acquire data remotely and autonomously, which was done by the Astis It's a Drone, and of course having this equipment tuned up and conditioned to this specific type of monitoring. With regards to the marine dynamics, the challenges were to reduce uncertainty regarding the methods previously developed and used, but as I mentioned, these were validated in this project, and of course, and consolidating the different downscaling strategies, which in the end, as I mentioned, using the hybrid downscaling was successful. Finally, as I already mentioned, in terms of data sharing, keeping data acquired in a project in an open repository, it's complicated, especially after the project has ended, and disseminating the results to the global audience, which I think we are managing fairly well. So this was my presentation for today. I would like, obviously, to acknowledge that I'm not an expert in all of these topics. This is a result of the work of many people from many different institutions, which I highlight here. I provide here some contacts for different work package leaders, so feel free to contact them, reduce your doubts. Follow the project, visit the project website and check the deliverables, which have all the information. And thank you very much for your attention.
And Pedro's mentioned that there are a couple of slides in his presentation that will be shared online covering the future work, but he didn't have time to fit them into the video. Next up, we have Dr. Kate Smith from Nova Innovation, and I think the only technology developer to take the stage this week.
Well,
maybe
I think Atlantis and Maygen have been represented, but
yeah. I think Fraser's afraid of the stage.
I don't blame him.
So Kate is going to talk about some of their experience of trying to analyse the data from the Nova array in Shetland. Thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. So I work for Nova, who are a tidal energy developer, so maybe different to some of the other presentations you've seen this week. I'm just going to be talking about some of the practical techniques we've come up to try and deal with the sheer volume of data that we collect through our monitoring programmes. So I've got a couple of examples, one from Shetland and one from our more recent project in Canada. And I should probably say I feel quite underqualified compared to some of the people in the audience here to talk about some of these technical issues. But what we do in Nova is we learn from what all you experts are doing, and we try to apply that practically to our projects to make sure that we're delivering effective monitoring. So this is Nova's turbine, relatively small machine. It's a 100 kilowatt turbine, totally submerged, sits on the seabed, gravity-based foundation. So this is just one of our turbines operating up in Shetland in Blue Mill Sound. So, as I say, the Shetland Tidal Array was our first project. It was actually the world's first offshore tidal array. We deployed 3 turbines in 2016 and grew the array to 6 turbines in 2023. And in terms of the environmental monitoring, this is a recurring theme this week. It always comes down to collision risk. So all of our project licenses have a requirement that we monitor for near-field interactions with marine wildlife. So the way we do this in Shetland is we use turbine-mounted high-definition video cameras. The water clarity in Shetland is amazing, so it lends itself to this really simple technique. And we've been using this technique since 2016 when the first turbine was installed. We haven't seen any collisions or near misses at all to date, but we've got masses of data. So at the last count, which was last year, we had over 10 terabytes of video data, which is a lot. So we have to find a way of dealing with this and analysing it and reporting on it as part of our licence conditions to Marine Directorate, previously Marine Scotland. So this image just shows some of the examples of the amazing quality, really, of the video footage that we get from Shetland. This is just some stills, sort of fish. we see quite regularly. The examples here of diving birds, so European shag and seal, the harbour seal, they're less common to see in our video footage. So I've now just got some examples of some of the video. So this is just a sort of a typical image of some of the fish that we see milling up around hub height, particularly when the tides aren't really moving in Blue Mole Sound. So they mill up around hub height, then drop down to the seabed when the tide picks up. And we know this because we've also got cameras mounted to the underside of the turbines looking down towards the seabed. This next one is one of the rarer instances of a harbour seal that we've captured in the subsea video. You can just see in the background there that the blade is stationary. So again, slack tide, the tides aren't moving. The sort of fuzziness on the camera lens there is a bit of biofouling. So periodically we do have to carry out maintenance to clean the lenses of the cameras. And then finally, this is a really nice image of a European shag chasing a bait ball of fish. Again, slack tide, the tides aren't moving. We just don't see interactions of animals with the blades when the speeds of the currents are such that the blades are turning. So how do we deal with this 10 terabytes worth of data? Well, previously, it was all done manually. So we took a sort of a systematic, semi-stratified approach to extracting samples of our video data and manually reviewing it so that we could basically assess whether there had been near-field interactions to report then to Marine Directorate. It was extremely time-consuming, very high labour, and actually I think subject to potential sort of user error. I've sat there for hours watching this video data with nothing happening, and you have to just be concentrating the whole time. So we thought, right, there's got to be a better way. So last year we worked with CGG, a high-power computing company, to look at whether we could automate the process in some way. I think sort of chasing the holy grail of trying to automate target detection, we're probably on a hiding to nowhere because the near-field interactions are so few and far between. But I do think that automation could play a role in getting rid of all the data that is really uninteresting and there's nothing happening. So we worked with CGG to feed in some of our video footage to look at whether automation could be introduced as a way of analysing and processing some of the data. Full details, I should say, have been published, and this is the link to the paper, but I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the process we went through. So we provided CGG with a whole load of our footage. We snuck in there some of the video clips that we knew had fish, birds and mammals in there, and a whole load of stuff that didn't, including just images of the turbine blades moving. And they developed a model, an algorithm using machine learning to categorise that data from all that footage into 3 categories: animal, plant or background. The chart on the right there shows the sort of success rate of the categorising. What the algorithm wasn't very good at was distinguishing between plant and background, so drifting seaweed, moving blades, or biofouling on the turbines. But actually that doesn't matter. We just need to know whether something is an animal interacting with our turbines or it's something else. What the something else is doesn't matter. So we actually regrouped all of the model categorisation into just a binary system, either a target, an animal, or something that wasn't an animal, a non-target. The model was refined using that approach, and then we had a testing phase where we ran a whole series of further footage to categorise into this target and non-target category. And it actually, the model had a 94% accuracy for distinguishing between targets and non-targets. And 80% of all targets, animals, in the data set that was tested were detected, and 100% of all the birds and the mammals in that data set were detected. Some of the fish were missed, so there were 3 videos that contained fish that the algorithm just didn't pick up. But when we looked at those in more detail, it was due to sort of positioning of the fish or their movement patterns in comparison to the background contrast. The model did pick up some false positives, but from a regulatory point of view, that's much less concern than missing targets altogether. So it's very easy to review a smaller subset just to rule out those false positives. So in terms of the detection capability, all the birds and mammals were detected by this model. Missed some fish, but we kind of understand why. And interestingly, the model picked up some fish that we had missed as human reviewers. So this image here on the right just shows these are fish that are actually going through when the blades are moving. and they shoot through past the sort of the optical area of the camera, and you blink and you miss them, but the model was actually picking them up. So that was a really interesting sort of learning point for us. In terms of the efficiency of this process versus manual review, 200 videos, which is about 20 hours of footage, can be processed in just 30 minutes. Manual review is still required, but there's a massively smaller data set for manual review, and that equates to sort of around 87-90% reduction in interpretation time, which is huge in terms of how much of our data we can analyse and report to Marine Directorate on. And on that subject, we've had a lot of discussion with Marine Directorate and NatureScot about whether we can now transition to this sort of more automated approach for our data analysis. And just last month, we received regulatory approval that we can actually now use this automated technique for our monitoring reporting. So moving on very quickly now to our second example. So we also have a project planned for the Outer Bay of Fundy. So we're calling it the Nova Tidal Array. It's in Petite Passage in Nova Scotia. It will be a 1.5 megawatt project with phased installation of turbines. The first turbine is due to go in this year. Conditions there don't lend themselves so nicely to just using optical cameras. So for the near-field turbine monitoring, we're going to be using turbine-mounted cameras, but also supplemented with a remote observation platform, which will house 3 optical cameras and a multi-beam sonar. And the ROP itself was installed in Petite Passage in 2022, so that gave us a really nice opportunity to start to understand the type of data that we're getting and how we might analyse and process that. So the cameras we operate in conjunction with motion detection software. We had used that previously in Shetland, but it just constantly fires with the rotating blade. So, but in this instance, the ROP was installed before the first turbine, so we've been using it with the motion detection software. A timestamped video and thumbnail is saved every time motion is detected. And we found that since we've deployed the ROP, this is really effective for fish detection, but we're getting a whole load of false positives as well. So we're getting masses of data, so around 300 video files every day for every camera. In terms of multi-beam sonar, when we first installed the ROP, we were using it in conjunction with the manufacturer's target detection software. And as many of you have talked about already this week, multi-beam sonar generate masses of data. So we were getting thousands of files for every day that the ROP was installed. And actually, when we looked at these and we sort of cross-calibrated with the optical camera data, most of them were false positives. They were just bits of seaweed drifting through the site. And interestingly, and more worryingly, some of the large targets, such as sharks, which we get quite a few sharks coming through the site, were missed. So the image here on the right just shows, I don't know if you can see the blue boxes around some of the objects there, but that's just the motion detection software. So that's the type of thumbnail that is captured when motion is detected. So we needed a solution to this. We were gathering loads of data, and once the first turbine goes in, we need to be able to report to DFO, the regulator, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, on our near-field monitoring. So, as I was saying at the beginning of my talk, you know, we look at what the clever academics in the world are doing in this field, and so we looked at, what have other people done as a way of dealing with this huge volume of monitoring data that's collected particularly from multi-beam sonar. So some really useful work has been done in Canada through the Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Research Association Pathway Programme, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But it was a project that was looking at validating reliable environmental monitoring for tidal and ocean energy projects. So a couple of people were involved in the room, were involved in a really useful piece of work to look at sort of automating multi-beam sonar data analysis. So I know Greg Trowse is here somewhere and Benjamin Williamson as well. So we sort of looked at this piece of work and thought there's something to be learned from this that we can apply to our project. So this project looked at using deep learning on video converted multi-beam outputs. They had found an accuracy of 82 to 99% of detecting true targets using this video converted multi-beam. So we thought, right, well, we're going to try that. So we trialled taking our multi-beam sonar outputs and converting them to video files, and then applying our motion detection software to those video converted outputs. And the motion detection software that we use is customizable, so you can tune it So we were able to cross-calibrate with the optical camera outputs to fine-tune the detection capabilities of the motion detection software on the multi-beam outputs. We actually found the end result of that process was that there was much better target detection in the multi-beam sonar than using the manufacturer's software. So the motion detection software that we use can actually trigger recording from different sources. So the next step for us was to look at whether we can use the triggered multi-beam sonar to filter some of the camera data, because we were still getting a lot of false positives on the camera data. So we now use the multi-beam sonar motion detection triggers to then synchronise capture of the optical camera data that aligns to the same timestamps. We found that we're getting far fewer false positives in the camera data, but really good target detection rates as well across the sort of whole data set. So, a running theme through all of this is that manual review is still required. This doesn't replace the need for manual review, but it massively reduces the size of the data set that we then have to look at in detail for our reporting. So I've just got some examples here of this synchronisation of motion detection. So the image on the left is the multi-beam sonar video, and the image on the right is the same time-stamped video data from the camera. So it just shows a shoal of fish detected on the multi-beam sonar and then coming through the field of view of one of the 3 cameras on the ROP. Then another example here of a shark. So this is one of the sharks that we see coming through the site, picked up in the video footage in the multi-beam sonar, and again passes through the field of view on the camera. And then finally, in sort of slightly lower light conditions, again, a shark coming through, picked up on the multi-beam video and in the camera video. So in terms of what next, we're going to further develop this use of automation in Shetland and Canada. We think it's kind of the way to go. It's the only way we can continue to sort of expand our project, but be able to report to regulators and just avoid this bottleneck of having loads of data and not reporting on it. So I think it's going to become increasingly important as arrays grow in scale. You know, we're moving away now from small scale arrays and single devices to multi-turbine arrays. So sort of the next step for us is we've got a big project planned here in Orkney, actually, at the Fall of Warness. It'll be a 16-turbine array called the Sea-Star project. It's got technical, commercial and environmental components, and it's all about proving tidal at scale. So we're going to be looking at reliable monitoring at array scale and sharing that learning to help the wider sector. And we think it's an opportunity to break further ground. And finally, just a plug that we want the environmental aspects of Sea-Star to be overseen by an environmental regulatory steering group. So I know I've spoken to several of you in the room already about maybe sort of representing your organisations on that group, because what we want to do is use the Sea-Star project to really expand the evidence base on monitoring good practice and environmental evidence on impacts. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kate. Next up, we are moving from tidal energy back into offshore wind. So Julie is going to give a presentation on some of the data monitoring alongside the Sea Green offshore wind project.
Hi everyone, my name is Julie Salvetat, and I'm working on a postdoc at UHI at the ERI, which is in Verzo. And I'm going to show you a little bit of my work on understanding the environmental interaction of marine renewables. Sorry for my accent, I'm French, so please be kind. So this is the study area. It's Sea Green, so it's a massive offshore wind farm that has over 100 wind turbines, and it's quite recent. It's fully operational since October 2023, and it has a big generating capacity of 1,075 megawatts, and also it has the particularity to be on a quite deep bottom for offshore wind farms. It's the deepest, around 60-meter depth. And you can see also the size of the wind turbine, which is quite big. So I work on the Bellagio project, which has put several instruments in the water and has also led a lot of cruises. And so I have data from a cylinder, which is the little picture you can see on the top left, and it's equipped with WBAT, which is connected to 2 echo sounders. So at 2 frequencies, it's 38 and 200 kilohertz. And the cylinder is also equipped with CTD, a fluorometer, and ADCP, and they are facing upward. They are on the bottom and facing upward to the surface. And I also have data from cruise, so I have spatial data. Close to the sea green, you can see the limits in pink of sea green, so it's like really close to one of the turbines that's at the edge of the wind farm. And so I have a combination of temporal data with a fixed point and spatial data with cruises. So those 2 types of datasets, I'm particularly working on the echograms. So you can see here on the top an example of 1 week of data from the WBAT at 38 kilohertz. So you can see the sea surface that's waving a little bit. And down you can see 1 transect of the Choristes dataset, which is the name of the boat. And so you can see the bottom depth, which is derived from the echo sounder data. And you also can see in color the representation of the acoustic intensity that is sent back by anything that's detected in the water column, so shoals, plankton. And so yes, on both cases, we are working with 2 frequencies to allow a little bit of frequency differentiating to do a little calibration. So this is the Bellagio project. It has like it's one part of the Bellagio project. It's quite big, but this part is to has the aim to answer the question: do the offshore wind farms alter the foraging opportunities, and can we predict prey availability with time, tides, and oceanographic features, and also in the a little bit further, can we disentangle the prey aggregation effect from prey availability? So one of the main hypotheses is that fish are more available as prey for birds, for instance, when they are themselves foraging. So one of the first steps I took in analyzing the data, so on Choristes data, because I'm going to mostly talk about Choristes data, was to index the co-occurring birds observation with the acoustic data. So you can see here this 1 transect. And so what's interesting about that is that you can have information on the quantity of organism in the water column co-occurring with the birds that are observed. The second step was to extract fish from the echograms using just the threshold, because fish have a constant response to frequency. At both frequency, they have a similar response, so it's easy to just apply a threshold and extract the boundaries of shoals using both echograms. And there is a little steps, a little tweak from this article, Les EMIR, to just expand the shoals. And also, then I did a little discrimination between fish echo and zooplankton echo, which is adapted from Bayern methodology, which first step is to find the limits between the distribution of values between what is a fish and what is not a fish. So to do that, I used the fish shoals I extracted first, so those are my fish, to give me the distribution values of the fish echoes. And then the remaining echoes will all treated as non-fish, so plankton-like, And so that gives me the threshold limits between both distribution. I can just apply that threshold to the ecograms to separate fish-like from non-fish ecos. And well, in this methodology, there is a second small step on trying to retrieve the fish that had a positive answer to the increase of frequency. So it means that their backscattering is higher at 120 kilohertz than at 38. Yes, because the method is working using the differentiation between the ecograms. So some fish, those that don't have swim bladders, they have a higher response with a higher frequency. So there is a small step that allows you to retrieve some of those echoes, and by just applying a second threshold on the difference on both frequencies. So now that I have all those kind of data sets, well, it's a very high resolution data set because the vertical resolution is half a second, and the horizontal resolution is half a second. The vertical resolution here is 20 centimeters. So then I did grooming and averaging over the whole water column. So I would have 1 point each kilometers, and so that would be easier to do some statistical analysis on the smaller data sets. So what I use, the value I use from the acoustic data is what we call the NASC, which is the nautical area scattering coefficient, which is a proxy of biomass. So I'll just refer to it as acoustic biomass, and I've been working on the fish one and the other, the remaining echoes, which are plankton and zooplankton. And also added some environmental data, so I have the distance from the turbine and also the time of the day and the tide index, that is just a little index to be able to see the tide effects. And also we have the bottom depth from the echo sonder, and the tide index was calculated with using the velocity from the ADCP data that's at the mooring. So this allows to plot some average map of fish echo distributions. And here is the Croistes data. So you have the bathymetry behind, and the distributions of the acoustic biomass. So you can see a gradient. It's increasing when we go further from the offshore wind farm. And then for the fluid-like, let's say, acoustic biomass, it's a little bit different. We have say a hotspot that is located a little bit further on the west, close to we have like a wide bathymetric features here, and maybe it's playing a part on that aggregation there on the north leg, because we have like a slightly different response on the north leg than on the south leg. Then with the shoals I extracted, also like plotted the number of shoals, and you can see that really close to this WI bathymetric feature on the north leg, we have an increase of the number of shoals. So this is an interesting spot to investigate. I also plotted the number of birds we observed sitting on the water, which is interesting because you can see there are on the north leg more birds aggregating closer to the wind farm. And I think something that we don't always look at, but it's interesting in that case, is the number of species that were observed. And so you have, I think the number of species matches a little bit more the distribution of like fish feed-like echoes with this point a little bit at the east of the Y bathymetric feature. So then I treated North and South leg separately to see the impact of the bottom depth, the distance to the turbine, and tide index and time index. For here it's for the fish. So we can see that well, there is an increase of acoustic biomass with the depth on both legs, and also there is an increase of this biomass at almost the same distance to the wind farm, and there is an interesting trend with the tide index and the time index. So, and we can see that there is slightly difference between both legs. And for instance, on the north leg, I mean that's true for the south leg as well. We have like more fish during flood, and like it decreases when we go to high slack. And for the south leg, it reached its minimum at high slack, and then it comes back up again with ebb. And it's also interesting with the time. We have like a diminution towards when we go toward noon. So it's like this shows a little bit of the vertical migration. It's like the fish going down toward the bottom, and maybe the decos are then masked with the bottom detection, and we lose some signal for fish, and then high up again. So and now if we look at the zooplankton part, we have the same trend with depth, and also with the distance to the turbine. But the trend for tide and time index is quite opposite to the fish. So it's interesting to see that, for instance, you have the highest quantity of zooplankton around high slack. So when there is less current, so those are animals that have maybe less mobility. So it's difficult for them to swim against the current, and it's also the same for the time index. We have a quantity that's higher around noon, so that's like opposite to the usuals, and so we have maybe predation avoidance. Well, there's still work to do on that aspect, and a lot of other aspects, because there's more data to process, and that will be my next step, and I'm almost finished. So there is more data to add to test now for the seasonal trend, but also this WBAT data that I haven't shown that can help to disentangle the temporal trend with core current and other instruments. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'll let you figure that out. Next up, we have Natalie. So after hearing Kate and Julie talk about all of the amount of data that we need, I'm quite excited to see the word minimalist in the title for this next presentation. So maybe you'll tell us how we can avoid all of these like gazillion gigabytes of data. Thank you.
Maybe. Let's see. Do you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Just adjusting for vertical difficulties, I guess, challenges. Okay, so after all of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is enough. So this is a bit of I guess a heads up is that this has been more of a statistical exploration of what we might require in order to be able to say something. We have a lot we've been talking about this week is about tidal and collision risk, and how we have tons of zeros there. Unfortunately, I'm not looking at that in this project, but that would be very interesting. So if anyone wants to get together and talk about how we can fund something into that, just hit me up. But here it's more about offshore wind and how to find some effects of that. And also, full disclosure, I am also not a statistician. So if anyone is a statistician, please feel free to hit me up. Yeah, and this is part of the collaboration. It's a PREDICT project, which is a collaboration between the University of the Highlands and Islands, University of Aberdeen, and our industry partner, Ørsted. So really brief context, because we don't need more of this, really, but there's ongoing increase of offshore wind developments in the North Sea. And this means that there's also a need for robust speed in environmental impact assessments and in our prediction of what the effects are going to be at these large scales. So in order to achieve this fast and robust offshore wind effect research, we need to structure our environmental research around testing these ecological hypotheses that we have from like ecological theory by testing bottom-up WASP waste and top-down processes. And what I'm going to talk about here today is specifically the WASP waste kind of process, where we have the mobile top predator distribution depending on their primary prey, that is fish. And if you want to read more details about how we can structure our research in this kind of way, you can read about it in the paper. So that's fantastic, but in terms of fish data, what do we actually need to be measuring? So if this is kind of, we consider this like a wish list of what we would need. We need some information about the fish availability to the top predators. We need to know where they are. We need information about density as well. And we need these at high enough resolutions and at multiple different resolutions. So that, there's a question of scalability in terms of space and in terms of time. So we need to be measuring at really high frequencies, and we need to be measuring at multiple different frequencies over multiple scales. So, you know, the really fine scale that Julie was talking about, the sort of centimeters, meters, and also over kilometers. And ideally, we want to be measuring a lot of concurrent information about environmental drivers, such as chlorophyll. Some of the hydrodynamics would be great, top predators and whatnot. And yeah, so then we go out and we collect all of these things. But as you were saying, Alba, there are limitations with this, and that is that one of them is this is high cost. I'm sure all of you will agree or know that this is monetarily high cost. It's also quite high in carbon cost. I don't know, we haven't really touched on this at this conference, but these are usually surveys that are conducted with vessels. So we have these high carbon cost of the vessels going out to do the survey. This is maybe something to think about. And it generates just absolutely ginormous amounts of data, a lot of which are zeros, and we need to process these. But this is also kind of contributing to the situation that we really don't want to have, which is data-rich, information-poor, or DRIP situation, which we kind of have. Maybe not a very popular opinion, but I'm just going to put it out there. So how do we get away from this? How do we collect the required data that we need at these resolutions? A bunch of different types of resolutions, different trophic webs, all of that, but without generating these like sort of high costs and huge data sets. Well, what we can do is we can try to learn from the past, and that is we can use existing data sets that we've already collected. We have some that are standardized that have been collected over many years and are collected annually to try and find out what they can tell us about how we should be designing our sampling for the future. So it boils down to saying we can assess representativeness of existing fish surveys in space and time to plan offshore wind effect monitoring. And specifically, we can ask these questions. I'm sure we can ask more questions, so feel free to suggest more. But specifically, we can ask how many sampling points do we actually need, and that is no more and no less than we need. Where exactly, measuring what exactly, do we need to be measuring absolutely everything, or can we sort of get away with measuring a little bit less, fewer things, for how long, and at what frequency? And today I'm only going to talk about the first point, how many sampling points, but yeah. So for example, we can take the Firth of Forth sand eel survey data set that's conducted by the Marine Directorate every year. This is in a great location to do this because it's also an area of concurrent offshore wind development, ongoing and like future as well. And that's an active acoustic survey, sand eel survey that's conducted. And the data set I'm going to talk about today is 1997 to 2002. The data set is actually much larger than that, but this was what was really readily available, so we'll go with that first. So then we look at this data set. We get sand eel densities out of this. What can this data set tell us or reveal about sampling when we apply a little bit of sort of geospatial statistics, I guess, to the question? And again, just full disclaimer, I'm not a statistician, so if you are, please really do hit me up. So we can get a couple of insights. And the first is if we just applied a variogram to one of the years, the year 2000, and I'm selecting this as a representative year, but that just means it behaved, so it was easy to show what I'm talking about. There you see that the sill is reached around 7,700 meters. So this tells us something about the scale of when the sand dunes are aggregating. We get an actual number for that, and that can tell us something about the distance we need to be sampling at. So the distance between the sampling points needs to at least be a factor 2 of that range. Ideally, it would be a factor 10, but it needs to at least be a factor 2. So divide 7,700 by 2. Then we can also get, we can do some multivariate, moving block bootstrapping to get some confidence in our ability to detect sand dunes. I'm not sure if it was really obvious from those plots that I showed before, but there's a lot of zeros in here. And so most of the time, so you can think of it as, how confident are we that we're actually capturing the ones in here, the presences? So that you can run this and then see the confidence that we get. And you can apply sort of different bandwidths on that final full value, which is 30% in this case for 2000. And what you see here is that there are different bands that I've chosen kind of arbitrarily, 10, 25, and 50%. We can have a whole other conference and discussion about what those bands should be in terms of what is good enough in terms of detection. But if we just say the 25%, we need more or less the full data set, actually. But you also notice something very interesting, which is that it decreases very quickly, this confidence interval. So at around the 50% mark, you're not really adding that much extra data to it, extra information to it. And then we can also look at, because we have this fun situation where we have a data set that has both a lot of zeros and has huge densities at the same time, so it's both zero inflated and over dispersed. You can look at what do we need to be able to do to say that we have captured that full range of the sand dune densities. So the zeros, the ones, but also those really large densities. So again, you can run this multi-block bootstrapping at decreasing sample sizes to see at what sample size you actually need to be able to capture those really big densities. And from this just plot, it's also kind of a logarithmic relationship. You can see we actually don't need to sample the full data set. It's at around 50%, we're really capturing those densities. So in conclusion, just from this, we can take these three sort of exercises that we conducted on 1 year of the data, and we can say, okay, we need 392 sampling points at a maximum of 4,000 meters distance apart to measure sand dune distribution and density to within 25%, sort of like of the truth, the truth. So that's great. However, 392 is still a really large number. And if the idea is to move away from doing these sort of vessel trawls and vessel surveys, vessel surveys, and then moving towards potentially putting landers in specific strategic locations, 392 is crazy. So that's not good enough. And we have a huge amount of variation between the years. I picked 2000 to illustrate sort of the process, the theory, what is happening here, but there are other years, 1997 to 2002 and more, and they don't all behave as nicely. And actually, are these the most relevant parameters? This is a question I'm actually posing to the audience. If this, hit me with more parameters to feed in. Is this range of density actually valuable? Should we be separating things into zeros and ones? Yeah. And then I didn't even touch on the first, or back in the beginning, I didn't talk about when, where exactly, and then for how long. Which leads me to next steps, which is we can combine and add more years. We can do a little bit of more fancy types of variograms for that. We can add hydrodynamic regime to the mix. We know from previous work and also with the Pelagio project that hydrodynamic regimes are potentially very important to changes that will happen to hydrodynamics and whatnot. So adding that to the equation, what does that actually give us? And then actually, can we quantify the maximum available power in the sense of sensitivity using as many different variables as possible? Because some of these data sets, we're able to, we actually have this data, so as Julie was talking about, we actually have these data sets, so we can put them all together and say, okay, well, what are we actually aiming for? What's the best that we can possibly do? And sort of span the gamut from if we have very little information, sand yield density only, let's say, and we have all the information, like where can we find sort of where we want to be, so to speak. Because as we're saying, this thing about balance, I guess, it's about finding kind of this compromise between you want to do the best possible job, but you have all of these constraints. And anything else. So really, I'm, again, not a spatial statistician or anything like that, so if you think of anything, please hit me up. And just to end, yes, thank you for your attention. You can hit me up, those are my contacts. And then I just have one final slide on a totally different subject. If you're willing and able to provide your opinions on guidelines for the use of animal-borne biologging data in the marine renewable energy industry, please fill out this poll. Liz and I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll leave that slide up so people can grab that information while we do Q&A. So we have about 15 or so minutes before we head into lunch. So I'd like to ask my speakers back up to the stage. And we've got first question up here on the right-hand side.
Thank you. I do have a question for Kate. So we are missing, for collision, we are missing like this, what's happening at the animal behavior at small scale. So I was wondering, you've been talking about that, like your video, so just wondering if there is a way also to kind of analyze this video to find like behavior. And my other question, sorry, is that do you know if we can use the same algorithm to analyze similar data set but from different video cameras? Video you need to train and everything.
Yeah, two great questions there. On the first point, you know, we've got, as I say, 10 terabytes of video data from Shetland and growing. Not all of that is sort of ecological or biological interest, but a lot of it is, you know, particularly on the fish side of things. And at the moment, as a developer, we have to focus on analysis that meets the requirements of our licence conditions, and that is, have near-field encounters happened? Did those near-field encounters translate into collisions? So there's a whole load of really interesting analysis that could be done on our data that we just don't have the resource to be able to do that. But we've got all our data. It's still there. You know, we don't get rid of any of it because we know it's got value. So yeah, for sure, I think there is a lot more that could be done to analyse our data, to understand some of the behavioural stuff, some of the fine scale movements around the turbines, particularly of fish, as I say. Instances of marine mammals and birds are so rare that, you know, we've sort of gone so far as to try to correlate those with tidal flow, understanding how those interactions relate to the tidal conditions. But again, I think, you know, there's a lot that could be done. On your second point about whether the algorithm that CGG developed with us, whether that could be applied to other locations, other technologies, etc. Yeah, for sure. You know, and one of the purposes really of the pilot study that we did with CGG is they've already done a lot of work in this arena in terms of automated wildlife detection in video footage, and they think that type of approach has got masses of potential application. So really ours was just a pilot to trial the technique, but yeah, for sure. And I know, you know, we've put CGG in direct contact with OES Environmental to discuss this very topic really of taking the approach they've developed and applying it to other scenarios.
I'm going to steal my chair's prerogative and just kind of follow up on that question. And you said that the regulators in Scotland have agreed that you can use these automated processing techniques. have you tried to start those conversations with the regulators in Canada to see if you can just directly apply the same thing, or are they going to force you back to the point where you've just got humans sitting there watching the videos all day?
No, so I've got to be careful here because our case officer from DFO, Sean, is in the audience. So. But yeah, I mean, one of the benefits of us being able to deploy the remote observation platform at the site in Canada before the first turbine went in is it enabled us to sort of tinker around with the data basically. So when the first turbine goes in later this year, we can hit the ground running. So yeah, we've had a lot of discussion already with DFO about that sort of cross-calibration, synchronization, automation that we've been doing based on what we're gathering from the ROP to date. So we're really hopeful that when the first turbine goes in, we can carry on those discussions with DFO and apply some of these automated techniques, because basically, the slide I showed about the 300 files per day for each of the three ROP cameras, thousands of files per day from the Gemini, the multi-beam sonar. That's untenable. From a sort of rapid analysis and reporting point of view, it is untenable. It's just not a viable approach for a sort of a commercial tidal project. So we've been having a lot of discussion with DFO, and they've been really, really receptive. Obviously, we have to make sure that we're not just sort of cutting corners and missing real sort of interactions with the turbine. But I think some of the methods that we've developed in Shetland and that we're developing in Canada are going to enable sort of much more accurate and timely analysis and reporting.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Doug Gillespie, CMAML Research Units. Kate, come back to the microphone, please. I've got two very related questions, so I'll just sort of put them together, and you can answer them together, hopefully. And they're basically exactly on what you just said, is the performance of these automatic target detection systems in the presence of the sonar. So I'm asking, first of all, about your camera data from Shetland, I think it was. Did you attempt to measure or manage to measure any difference in performance in terms of efficiency and false positive rates when the turbine was rotating compared to when it wasn't rotating? And how concerned are you about your deployment in Canada about the performance of your algorithm, which is working quite nicely now, and quite what's going to happen to that when you put a turbine in front of it? Because our experience in Scotland was some stuff that was working pretty nicely when there wasn't a turbine there.
Yeah.
It blew up. When the turbine was there, it blew up quite badly.
Yeah.
Would you like to comment on both of this?
Yeah.
It's the same question.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. And you stick a turbine in front of an acoustic or an optical sensor that is using based on motion detecting, it's going to pick up the rotating blades. And that has always been an issue for us in Shetland. So initially we were using the motion detection software in Shetland before all this sort of development of algorithms with CGG. We trialled this use of motion detection software, but it was like, do you know what, it's just triggering all the time because the blades are rotating, so we weren't really reducing the size of the data set. Then CGG came along, and that was one of the issues they had to deal with. And actually, training the algorithm to recognise the rotating blades was I think it was fairly straightforward from them, because it's a predictable, it's the same movement. Once the model knows what the blade is doing in the field of view, it can recognise it really easily and quickly. So we're confident that learning can be applied once the first turbine is installed in Canada. So we can use that type of learning of that predictable movement of the blades to basically tune that out of the data capture, whilst not losing targets that may also be in the same sort of optical or acoustic field of view. So I think in terms of sort of what will happen in Canada, I think we're just going to try and build on the learning in Shetland. We don't know yet exactly which way it's going to go, and that's part of the ongoing discussions we're having with DFO. But this sort of, I think, this combination of automation as far as you can take it to get rid of data that you're confident is the zeros, so that it just reduces the size of the data set that has to be subject to manual review. That is always going to be a compromise, but I think we would want to be in a position where we're sort of more precautionary, so we're not missing targets. We would rather capture stuff that isn't a target than stuff that is and be missing it. But based on our learning from Shetland, we're pretty confident that we can screen out the rotating turbines now from the video data, certainly.
Yeah, I'll just say I agree with you entirely that like full automation where it just spits out nicely categorised detections is probably a fool's dream.
Yeah.
But getting it down to the point where the human doesn't kind of die of exhaustion.
Yes.
Processing events are right, so really focus on throwing a lot of zeros and have a human categorise the hard stuff is probably a very sensible strategy for most of these studies.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Hi, Mindy Green from EMIR. I've got another question for Kate. I was wondering how you positioned your sonar and camera in relation to the turbine, and if you needed to place your camera like slightly closer to the blades in order to pick up the same sort of resolution because of the turbidity, yeah, if that makes sense.
So at the moment we haven't got the turbine in Petite Passage in Canada. So at the moment the ROP is just installed on site on the seabed roughly where the first turbine is going to be. When we install the first turbine, the first thing we'll do is take the ROP out, because what we don't want to do is deploy the turbine on top of the ROP, take out thousands of pounds worth of monitoring kit. Once the first turbine has gone in, there's going to be a bit of trial and error playing around with the positioning of the ROP to get the sort of optimal acoustic and optical field of view of the rotor swept area of the turbine. So it's going to be trial and error and playing around with it. In terms of the cameras in Shetland, they're at a sort of a fixed point on we've got mounting points on the side of the turbine nacelle that just, again, are positioned to sort of maximise the field of view so we see as much of the rotor swept area as possible.
Great, thank you. Do we have a question that's not for Kate? No offense. Okay, there's a couple of hands on the stage. I think we're over here to see.
Okay, David Walker, University Statistical Naturally. Perhaps we've got room on this. We made a mistake of mentioning interannual variability. So I think actually one of the issues with a lot of research programs is we're collecting data with 1, 2 or 3 years, and interannual variability is a thing, certainly in the physical environment and in a lot of the ecosystem. So I don't know whether you saw evidence of each years being different, but the question is how do we deal with that in terms of trying not to make more measurements than we have to, at the same time recognising interannual variability, interdecadal variability trends are a thing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something I've thought about quite a bit as well. Luckily, we have quite a large data set in terms of the years, and I just showed like a really small snapshot of it. But interannual variability is one of those things we'll have to look into because we see quite a lot of difference just in terms of the sandial density, just that alone. Never mind adding in more variables to that. But one thing we can try and do is kind of try and quantify some of that interannual variability. Is the plan, at least, with adding more of these environmental variables. So that to be able to come with a recommendation, and it might not end up being the recommendation everyone wants to hear, but the recommendation of how much and for how long we need to put things in the water. So, yeah. But yes, definitely, interannual variability is a thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for stealing my question. This is also for Natalie. So just to really build on that direct data from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, I think just adding to what David was saying is the concept of really thinking about predictive modeling. You know, you've got this big, long data set, but we've also got a shifting baseline. And so just as you're thinking about interannual variability and decadal variability, and I love the idea of focusing on the data we actually need to collect to answer the questions, but that's a sort of an underlying, very large challenge to consider with that approach.
Yes, it'd be great. We can maybe catch up over lunch about that. Great.
Any more questions? So lunch is ready, so from here on out, if anyone else is asking questions, it's not my fault if we're late.
I have no further question. Sorry. Yes, we moved from Peter and Kate's great now. I have no question for you now. I guess it's quite linked to what's just been asked, but I think it's really useful analysis and a really useful starting point. I guess my one main concern about it is you were able to do this with an already huge and useful data set. And I guess the ultimate goal would be to get to a point where, you know, for all sites and all areas, you could make some sort of recommendations to how to, you know, reduce that. Are we always going to be in a position where we need a large, multi-year, possibly decadal data set in order to make those leaps to then saying how we can reduce, or are there any ways in which we can start planning for reduction in data analysis from the data collection from the off? Yeah, I guess in summary, are we always going to need big data sets in order to do this analysis to then reduce, and then we've already collected a lot of data?
Yeah, really great question, Joe, thanks. I think the hope is that, well, that's part of the reason doing this exercise is to kind of say that we actually can reduce that, that we don't necessarily need to collect all these data sets. And the key point there, I think, is it's in identifying the scales that we need and what exactly we need to be measuring. So I know I didn't go into that in this presentation, but it's about identifying some key environmental variables potentially that we can use as these underlying drivers. And then if you just measure those instead of measuring absolutely everything, you identify the most key one, and then you extrapolate from that. What does that tell you? Then maybe we can reduce the numbers. So I didn't go into it either there, but with the hydrodynamic regimes, we're hoping to be able to do some good stuff with that in terms of being able to scale it up also to like the whole North Sea, these different stratification regimes. So yeah, but thanks for your question, really good.
I don't see anyone else with their hand up brave enough to ask another question. So, like I said, lunch is ready, but the speakers will be happy to answer any more questions over the lunch break or for the rest of the day if they're here. So just like to finish off the session by thanking our speakers.